The school at Normandy, Minnesota was as small as the town it served. A handful of grades, a few dozen children, one room in the cold months and the sound of wind across the fields outside. Virgil Tangborn sat in that room and wanted more than it could give him. He wanted books, he wanted ideas. He wanted, more than almost anything, to understand the world that existed somewhere past the county line. The school only went through the 11th grade. 12th, the nearest high school that offered one was 10 miles away in Bemidji, and the Tangborn family had no automobile to spare, not with the farm demanding every hour and every pair of hands. So Virgil did what serious young men with no money and an unquiet mind have always done. He improvised. When Virgil was 18, he learned that Minnesota ran a mail-order library program, that he could write away for books, and the state would send them to his door. He wrote to that library. The books came. He read every one. In his journal, a habit he had begun in his teens and would keep until the last weeks of his life, he recorded what it meant. "This is a tremendous discovery," he wrote. "That will change my life." He was not wrong. Virgil Tangborn was born on May 23, 1920, in Schleswig, Iowa, the second oldest of 6 children. The family moved to northern Minnesota, and Virgil grew up on a small farm near Normandy, the kind of place where boys became men by work rather than by schooling, where the calendar ran on planting and harvest rather than semesters. But Virgil's mind refused to be contained by seasons. He read philosophy. He read history. He borrowed his way through ideas that most young men in Normandy had never encountered, and he recorded his reactions in a careful, earnest hand, a running argument with the world about what it meant to live responsibly inside it. After a close call that left him shaken, he wrote something that would come to define him. "After such a close brush with mortality, I feel that I have an obligation to destiny and want to do something with my life that will benefit mankind." He was not yet 20 years old. His father believed that education was the answer. When the war was over, the elder Tangborn told his son there was a future waiting, in a classroom, as a teacher, passing what Virgil had worked so hard to acquire, along to others who hadn't had the chance to find it themselves. Virgil turned the idea over privately. It was not an ambition, he announced, but a quiet dream, the kind that serious men keep close. It's because they know how easily the world can strip of them away. Then, on a Sunday in December 1941, the world arrived. Virgil wrote in his journal that day with the steady, deliberate hand of a man forcing himself to think clearly about something terrible. "This has been one of those days when I have completely relaxed my will and just drifted," he wrote, "following almost every impulse, living hour by hour. Last Sunday, Japan attacked in the Pacific and brought US into war. This makes an army life for me extremely probable. Must face it with resolution to do my best to adjust myself to such a life." He did not panic. He did not rage. He made a decision, the same decision that millions of young Americans made in the weeks and months that followed, and he got on with it. The U.S. Army drafted Virgil Tangborn on March 30, 1943. He was 22 years old. Shipped to Camp Barkley, Texas, for training. He auditioned for the 90th Infantry Division band and was accepted as a French horn player. For the better part of 2 years, the band traveled across the United States, entertaining the troops being readied for deployment overseas. Virgil watched the war from a distance, reading, writing, preparing himself in the way he had always prepared for everything, through sustained, deliberate thought. In January 1944, the 90th Division sailed for England. The invasion was coming. Everyone knew it, even those who didn't know the date. Virgil wrote before he shipped out with the careful calm of a man who understood the odds without letting them devour him. "I might be back in a week," he wrote. "I might be back at the end of the decade. Nobody knows until I go to Fort Snelling." He never went to Fort Snelling. The 90th Infantry Division, the Tough Hombres, a nickname drawn from its original Texas and Oklahoma recruits, would go on to earn one of the most costly records of any American division in the entire war. General George Patton, who drove men and divisions relentlessly and praised almost no one, called the 90th one of the greatest divisions that ever fought. They would earn that verdict at enormous price. The 90th suffered the 4th highest casualty rate of any United States Army division in World War II. Every yard they took in Normandy and across France was paid for in full. Virgil Tangborn landed at Utah Beach on June 8, 1944, 2 days after the first waves hit the sand on D-Day. The beachhead was secured, but there was no safety in it. The hedgerow country of Normandy, the bocage, those ancient earthen walls crowned with thick, tangled vegetation that partitioned every field from every other, turned the advance into a grinding close-range fight. German defenders could disappear into a hedgerow 50 yards away and hold up an entire company. The 90th Division bled in those fields. Men went in with their unit and came out days later as one of a handful of survivors. The landscape that looked, from the air, like a pastoral patchwork of French farms was, at ground level, an attritional nightmare. Virgil survived the beach. He survived the first chaotic days in the bocage. He survived the artillery that fell without pattern or mercy, the ambushes that could come from any hedgerow, at any hour, the casualties that emptied out the familiar faces around him one by one. The 90th Division's situation in those early weeks was desperate enough that senior commanders rotated through, trying to fix it. It took new leadership, hard fighting, and the kind of grinding attrition that erases whole companies before replacements can reach the beam to forge the 90th into what Patton said it became. The men who made it what it was did so at the cost of their own bodies and their own lives, one field at a time, one hedgerow at a time, in a campaign that the histories summarize in paragraphs, and that the men who lived it could never entirely explain to anyone who hadn't been there. June 14, 1944. Virgil Tangborn had been on French soil for 6 days. Near the small village of Amfreville, an artillery ammunition dump came under heavy German shell fire. The field holding it erupted. Explosions chaining through the stacked rounds, smoke and fire rolling across the ground in a chaos of burning propellant and detonating steel. In the middle of it, a soldier was trapped in a burning truck loaded with the ammunition that was cooking off around him. It was not Virgil's sector. It was not his assignment. It was not the kind of moment that any reasonable reading of self-preservation would have carried a man toward. Virgil ran toward it. The official Silver Star citation records what happened next with the clipped precision of military language. On June 14, 1944, the field in which an artillery ammunition dump was located was heavily shelled. The ammunition dump was set on fire, and during the ensuing explosions, Private First Class Tangborn, seeing a wounded soldier trapped in a burning truck, filled with exploding ammunition, hurried to the truck accompanied by 2 other enlisted men to effect the rescue of the wounded man. They got him out. The wounded soldier survived. A second shell found Virgil Tangborn as he was finishing the job. He was 24 years old. He died where he had run toward, in a burning field in Normandy, saving a man he didn't know because it was the right thing to do. And because that, it turned out, was simply who Virgil Tangborn was. The United States Army awarded him the Silver Star posthumously on July 2, 1944. His citation used the word gallantry. The church at Nary was too small for the service they held on July 9th. People came from Bemidji and Cass Lake and Park Rapids and LaPorte and Guthrie, from all the surrounding country, to the place that had been too far for Virgil to finish school in. The men of the Bemidji American Legion post walked ahead bearing flags. Reverend Charles Swindells said the words. Virgil was buried at the Normandy American Cemetery, on the bluff above Omaha Beach at Colville-sur-Mer, in Plot E, Row 25, Grave 20. He rests among more than 9,000 American dead. The cemetery is visited by nearly 2 million people each year, most of them Europeans, who walk among those crosses and understand in a way that doesn't require explanation what it means that they are there. The journal survived. Virgil's brother Wendell kept it, the careful, earnest, searching record of a young man from a small farm in Minnesota, trying to understand the world and his place in it, right up to the edge of the moment when the world took him. Decades later, Wendell would publish it, so that the voice inside it would not be lost. But the journal had already been teaching long before that. In 1995, a first-year high school history teacher in Duluth named Steve Worrell returned to his classroom after lunch one day to find a bundle of papers on his desk. His principal had left them there. A note explained, "Here is the story of Virgil Tangborn. He's not going to be on the test. He's not going to be on the AP exam." Steve Worrell read through that afternoon and did not put it down. He has been teaching Virgil's journal ever since, for nearly 3 decades, at schools across Minnesota, and finally at the Academy of Holy Angels in Minneapolis. Worrell has put Virgil's words in front of his students every time they reach World War II. The journal entries. The private wrestling with Pearl Harbor. The quiet dream of becoming a teacher. The question of what a man owes to the world when the world is being torn apart. "I love history," Worrell said, But part of the reason I teach is so that guys like Virgil have a voice and people will know their stories. He paused when he said it the way a man pauses when something costs him something to say. In some ways, he did become a teacher. He taught me a lot about sacrifice, a lot about service, and deferring your hopes and dreams for something much larger. Hundreds of students have read Virgil Tangborn's words since that afternoon in 1995. They have read about the mail-order books and the discovery that changed his life. They have read the December 1941 entry, where he faces his fate with resolution. They have read a young man's private hope that his life would benefit mankind, written years before he ran into a burning field in Normandy, and proved, without knowing he was proving it, that it already had. Some of those students have gone to France. Some have stood at the grave on the bluff above Omaha Beach and read the words carved there, the rank, the name, the state, the cross, and understood for the first time in their lives that history is not an abstraction, not a chapter summary, not something that happened to other people in another time. It happened to Virgil Tangborn, who was 24 years old, who wanted to teach school and read books and understand the world, and who did not come home. The lesson he teaches them is the one he learned himself, the one he wrote in his journal long before he had any reason to believe it would survive. That a person's obligation to the world does not wait for perfect conditions, does not wait until the moment is convenient, does not wait at all. In Perrier's Normandy, a bronze monument stands to the memory of 4 American soldiers of the 90th Infantry Division who gave their lives liberating that town and its surrounding country. One of the 4 figures is Virgil Tangborn, depicted as a medic, aiding a wounded comrade, caught in bronze at the moment of the act that defined him. His face is not famous. His name does not appear in the general histories. He was a private first class from a small farm who wanted to read books and teach school and understand the world, and who ran without hesitation into an exploding ammunition dump because a man he'd never spoken to was going to die if he didn't. He was, his teacher says, one and still is, a teacher, in the fullest sense of what that word has ever meant. There is a particular kind of courage that does not announce itself and does not wait for conditions to be favorable. It simply acts in the instant it is needed, because the alternative is to let something worth saving be lost. Virgil Tangborn knew about that kind of courage. He had practiced a smaller version of it. Every time he borrowed another book he could barely afford to mail back on time. Every time he wrote another entry in his journal on a night when he had every reason to be afraid of what was coming. June 14, 1944, was not his first act of courage. It was simply his last. He rests in Plot E, Row 25, Grave 20, on the bluff above the beach where so many came ashore to do what had to be done. Each year, nearly 2 million people walk past that row of white crosses and understand something without being told. What those men gave, they gave completely, and without asking whether the price was fair. Virgil Tangborn got his wish. He is still teaching.